Hello, everybody. So what would you think if I told you that your homework assignment for this weekend is to go home and cook dinner? What do you think? Okay, good. I should tell you, though, there's some rules for your homework assignment. Rule number 1, you must cook from scratch. So what does that mean? That means you have to start with some raw ingredients, like broccoli, onions. Maybe you feel like eating meat. You'll need some raw meat, not pre-cooked. Raw meat, chicken, beef, then pasta, rice, your choice, it doesn't matter. But you got to take these raw ingredients and you're going to cook them. Rule number 2, your meal has to be healthy. That means you need to cook with a variety of ingredients and you need to cook with vegetables. Lots of vegetables. And rule number 3, you have to do it all by yourself. You cannot ask an adult for help. So how does this sound? Yeah? Good, that's good. I think there's probably some people who might think, okay, that's kind of daunting, especially if you've never cooked from scratch before. Well, I'm going to spend the next 10 minutes telling you why learning how to cook from scratch is one of the most important skills that you should learn as a teenager. Your health depends on it. Your independence depends on being able to cook from scratch. And I'm going to argue your future happiness depends from being able to cook from scratch. Okay, these days we eat a lot of processed foods. And processed foods are all those foods that come in packages. You see them at the supermarket, at the gas station. You can get them at the drugstore, at the corner store. Processed food is food that's made in a factory. Breakfast cereal is a processed food. Hot dogs are a processed food. Soup in a can, pasta sauce in a jar. Those frozen entrees, like frozen butter chicken or frozen pad thai, these are all processed foods. You get the idea. So a group of researchers wanted to know just how much processed foods people eat. So they got together and they looked at the results of a survey that asked a bunch of Americans what they eat every day. And they found that 60% of the food energy that people consume come from what they call ultra-processed foods. 60%. That's more than half. So why is this important? Because the researchers confirmed what a lot of people know already, and that is when you eat processed foods, you're eating a lot of sugar. This brings us to reason number 1, why you should cook from scratch. Cooking from scratch is good for your body. It's good for your brain. It's good for your health. Too much sugar is just bad for you. A diet that is high in sugar increases your risk of type 2 diabetes, heart disease, even cancer and stroke. And you know what they put sugar in? They put sugar in pasta sauce in a jar. That has sugar in it. Lasagna, frozen lasagna, that has sugar in it. That frozen butter chicken, that has sugar in it. Salad dressing. Breakfast cereal is loaded with sugar. And of course, fruit juices, pop, cookies, cakes, all this has sugar in it. And then there's a bunch of other not so healthy stuff that gets added to these packaged foods. For example, salt. According to the Center for Disease Control in the United States, more than 3/4 of the salt people eat in North America comes from processed food and restaurant food. And this is not the salt that's in the shaker on your table at home. No, this is sodium that's added to your food in the production process. And salt is not good for your body either. Too much salt in your diet can lead to high blood pressure, heart disease, and stroke. You might have heard of people in your family talking about high blood pressure. A lot of grandparents talk about high blood pressure. Well, it's not just people your grandparents' age who are getting diagnosed with high blood pressure these days. Young people are finding out from their doctors that they have high blood pressure too because of what they eat. Number 2 reason to cook from scratch. When you cook for yourself, you take control of your food. You are independent. You get to decide how much sugar or how much salt you cook with, and that means you get to choose how much of that stuff is going into your body. It's you who is stirring the pot. And that's why there's a push in some communities to cook from scratch, to get people to cook from scratch, because a lot of adults don't know how to cook from scratch either. Cooking from scratch is a skill that we are collectively forgetting. We're cooking from scratch less and less. In recent history, it used to be that you learned to cook at school, and there were classes called home economics. It was like gym or math, except you learned how to make chili or bake some scones or boil an egg. And around the time when I was a high school student, students had to stop taking home economics, and these classes were replaced by family studies. So that meant young people stopped learning these basic cooking skills at school. And with no cooking class at school, just about the only place kids can learn is at home. But remember, fewer and fewer families are cooking from scratch, and it's been this way for decades. So if you grow up in a household where adults cook from scratch, kids, they can learn from their families. They learn by watching. But food knowledge is like a chain, and if one link in the chain is broken, then the whole chain starts to fall apart. And we start to lose that traditional know-how that used to be passed from one generation to the next. Why don't adults know how to cook from scratch anymore? Or if they do know, why don't they cook from scratch so much anymore? Well, because they think it's a lot easier to open a can of pasta sauce than to actually make something from scratch. At least that's what the advertising campaigns, but run by the big food companies that make all those convenient food products, have been telling us for decades. But when you stop cooking from scratch, you end up handing over decisions about what you eat, about how you fuel your own bodies to those big companies that make all the food products. And in this way, you are losing your autonomy, you are losing your independence. So that's why there's programs all across the country where people are discovering how to cook. Young people, old people, they're learning the difference between sautéing and frying. They're learning the difference between steaming and boiling. They're learning how to chop vegetables without chopping off the tips of their fingers. They're learning how to make a healthy meal. They're learning how to use all these important skills. And these skills are so important because they bring us happiness. By learning to cook, people are discovering joy. They're discovering all the pleasure and joy that they find in food. The last reason I will offer you for why you should go home tonight and make dinner from scratch is that your future happiness depends on it. Seriously, it really does. If you learn to cook now, I'm going to bet that the meals that you make in the future will bring you happiness. They'll also make your friends happy, and they will make your family happy. That's because good food is delicious. That's obvious. And home-cooked food is full of love. But it goes deeper than this. Cooking is a form of creative expression. Okay, it is a lot easier to open a jar, pour it in the pot, a pasta sauce, let's say. But when you start by browning the onions and chopping the carrots, adding a little bit of this herb, maybe some of that meat, it's like writing a story or drawing a cartoon or composing a song. What you decide to put in that pot says something about who you are, where you come from, and what you like. And then when you serve that pasta sauce to someone else, you're telling them something. You're communicating with them. You're telling them a story about yourself through food. Also, just think about how important food is to those really special events in our lives. Christmas, Eid, Passover, Chinese New Year, birthdays, weddings. When we come together to celebrate, there's always food involved, isn't there? And what you serve says something about who you are. It says something about your culture. So learning to cook, it's fundamentally about who you are. It's about your culture. It's about your tastes. It's about you. Okay, maybe some of you are thinking, there's no way that you can do this. Though judging from the shouts, I'm feeling optimistic. But a lot of people do feel that this is too hard. Cooking from scratch is too hard. Or maybe it's too boring. Or maybe you're too busy. Or maybe you have too much homework. Or maybe cooking is for adults. Or maybe there's some adults in the room, maybe, who are thinking cooking is better left to the professionals. Well, I'm a journalist. I write about food and farming and food culture, and I've traveled around the world to research different ways people interact with your food. And let me tell you, this is not beyond anyone in this room. Everyone can cook. Cooking is for everyone. In the United Kingdom, learning to cook from scratch is now part of the school curriculum. In France, I visited a cooking school where they teach kids to make whole meals. Like they learn skills like how to fry fish, how to make escargot. There's a middle school in California where they teach kids first to grow the food, and then they learn to cook it. So this really isn't beyond anyone in the room. Cooking from scratch is something that you can do, and you could do it tonight. Okay, if not tonight, this weekend. So how are you going to start? Go home and make a plan. What do you want to cook from scratch? What do you like? Okay, but just remember rule number 2, it has to be healthy. Find a recipe, check out what's in your fridge, look in your cupboards, figure out what you're going to make, and then plan on making it. Make sure you give yourself a lot of time. And if you have to buy some ingredients, I'm going to ease up on rule number 3 and say you can consult an adult in this department. Otherwise, tell these people in your lives that you are making dinner, and then just go and do it. Because food is important. We can't live without it. The food we eat gives us the energy to do the things we love, to run, to dance, to read, to laugh, to breathe. And what you eat becomes you, literally. The food you swallow, your body uses this to build the building blocks of your cells that make up who you are, to make up you. So make what you eat count. Be ambitious. Roast a chicken. Make a beef curry. Stir fry some tofu and greens. Go cook for your life. Thank you.